special treatment? Do they have preferential treatment in terms of how many Chinese they can bring in terms of taxation? Yes. And this is confidential, but but I'll tell you. Indeed, they have longer years of taxation exemption. So normally you have 10 years, actually 5 years, after you declare profit, and you have to start to pay your taxation. And that's kind of the general rule in special economic zones around the world. The Chinese got it down to 25, or up to 25. So there's a much longer tax holiday for them. And also in terms of employment permits, there's no fixed quota for them, but the agreement is that they will get what they want. So they can import more Chinese labor than the usual limit. And then there are all these other conditions that they talk about, negotiated about over taxation without, how do you call that? When they import materials, they don't have to pay taxes. It's an ongoing negotiation process. So they're starting to build the infrastructure. So there are things that they will revisit every year. But so far, these are the terms that I've heard. The Zambian officials are willing to endure this kind of policies for the Chinese and give them all these kind of benefits because they're really serious about value-added capacity. And that's the term that I've heard over and over again in so many different contexts while I was with them, that they want value-added and they're willing to give as much if the Chinese are indeed helping them to build the capacity. I mean, they can forego certain number of years of taxation, but if they have the capacity, that's what they see as the long-term interest. And you know, if my analysis is right, I think they might as well be getting it in years to come, because this is not, again, not because of the Chinese, it's in Chinese interest to do it. Let's put it this way. And so, but we'll see.
And sorry, related to that, if you could talk a little bit more about those structural relationships with value-added products that come out of the special economic zone, and if you imagine that those products are going to end up being for the export market back to the Chinese market, or are going to also become, important sources throughout the African continent. Which markets do you think the SEZ will be targeting?
Well, we don't know yet because, I mean, there are only 14 firms and many of them are into smelting and not really, I mean, the manufacturing firms are still to come, and some of them have pledged and signed an agreement, but they haven't really set up shops. And I'll be back next year to actually trace what they're doing with the product. But the idea so far is that, and the Chinese would not be interested in limiting the market back to China because these are firms, they want to make profit. So for example, copper, where does the copper go? You know, they've been there for 10 years mining. The copper goes partly to China, but because the company is interested in making profit, and the way to make profit is not to send your copper back to Chinese firms where you don't get the best price. They sell part of the copper to the London Metal Exchange, which is this international market, and they get the best price, and copper prices have gone through the roof because of structural demands. Again, structural demands from China, and the industry people are saying we're in this super cycle, meaning that copper prices are not going to come down for a foreseeable future. So for the firms, to answer your question, the Chinese government may want to guarantee some sort of supply, but it won't be everything going back to China. It's not in their economic interest, and there's no need so far, unless you see some kind of embargo against supplying, you know, that you can't buy in the international market. Because selling and buying into the international market is to the advantage of these state-owned companies. Now, these state-owned companies, as I said, I need more time to study them. They are part state, part company, in a sense that they have dual missions. So they have to fulfill whatever strategic interest that the Chinese government want them to fulfill. But at the same time, talking to these managers, they are very desperate to make profit because they're competing with all these other foreign investors who also are making profit. And they themselves, as corporate people, profit is almost like the primary goal. And the government also, interestingly, the Chinese government is very clever. They would give, performance indicators to these guys, and they both have to take care of the profit. I mean, there are profit performance indicator, as well as market share. There are all kinds of indicator that would translate into different government objectives. So it's not just making profit, but making profit is definitely part of that. So they would sell to whoever can offer the highest prices. And they talk about, the possibility of, Africa itself becoming its own market. And also because of what is the agreement that the US has with Africa. So things produced in Africa can enjoy particular non-tax kind of status going to the US market. So they can take advantage of that and sell to wherever they want and to make the highest profit. But at the same time, they'll be given some kind of performance indicator that, well, you have to expand your operation to a certain percentage of the market, because it's strategically important for China to have its own source of raw materials. In case they can't get it for some reasons in the international market, they have their own source. And that's why they are buying up all these mines at the same time that they also sell to the international market. Yes, John?
Your central argument had a very interesting one about the role of managers and the ability then, by controlling work and pace of work, quality of work, and payment of work, to reduce the contract price 30%. That's a fantastic argument. I like that. On the other hand, presumably they get paid after 2 years.
Yes,
So
they do.
This is a deferred saving. So it's hard to understand how a 30% reduction in contract price can be achieved, unless I can imagine two things. One might be that there are a lot of managers. That when you say manager, we mean engineers, we mean accountants, and so there must be a lot of them to get a 30% reduction. So it'd be interesting to know a little bit more about what that sort of composition of that managerial group is. But the other would be, another way of thinking is that the cost of capital and the return to capital, first of all, the cost of capital is low, and the return, as you just said, are very high. Now, what are the costs of capital? I would imagine, given the capital overhang that these companies and the state in China was experiencing, there are a whole series of other instruments that you've alluded to, I think, in discussion. I would imagine there are certain kinds of tariff preferences given to re-imports, profit repatriation. Maybe there's a special program of profit repatriation back into China in which tax rates are low. And so I wonder, in terms of the PNG, that box which explains this 30% reduction, does that include some of these reduced costs of capital that Chinese firms are able to sort of access, or in terms of the sort of return on goods to China?
Now that's a tough one, because PNG doesn't capture, the cost of capital. Are you talking about construction or mining? I mean, in terms of the, export is not taxed and all that, I think the conditions for construction companies are quite similar across the board in those terms, the tariffs and also the import and export of machinery. They don't have their special arrangement. With mining,
there's no special arrangement for the export of machinery from.
No, I'm talking only with the special economic zone. The companies that go into the zone, they would have that kind of benefits, which is that they can, they can import and export machinery without paying taxes. But and only because we're anticipating only Chinese firms will be in the zone. So this will be a peculiarly Chinese kind of benefits that they can get. But in construction, it's the same in terms of export-import of material and machinery. It's the same for Chinese companies and also South African companies. No. If they are, it will be across the board the same. My understanding is that there's no. And engineering surplus labor, yes, there are many of them in China. I can't quantify like what is the pool or who will be willing to come, but by talking to these contractors, they have no problem finding people who are willing to come to work and accept those labor conditions. So I infer from that there is a large pool of surplus labor doing that level of work.
And on one of these sites, how many of these managerial workers would there be? 10, 20, 100?
Depending on how big the project is, if we're talking about a site of 1,000 people, it's common to find like 50 to 100. Yeah, 50 to 100, because we're talking about from the site manager, the guy who shook hands with the president, to the foreman, the guy who was wearing the hat and tried to teach the skills to the workers. So you have 50. In a site of 1,000, that's not that many. 1,000 to 100, we're talking about what, 5 to 10%? Yeah. Thank you.
I'm not sure if someone else is coming in here, so let's thank CK again for the wonderful talk.
Thank you. Thank you.